Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to the Centre Culturel Irlandais and to this conversation which launches our exhibition Surveillé-e-s. So I hope you will stay for the opening following this conversation. Societal change in the era of artificial intelligence. And I'm delighted to welcome our four speakers, Nina McGowan and Caroline Campbell, who are artists in Surveillé-e-s, Elaine Hoey, who has just completed a residency with us in the Centre Culturel Irlandais and who will be showing with us next year, and Barry O'Sullivan, who comes to us from University College Cork and who is also the chair for this evening's conversation and who will kick us off with a short presentation on artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Thank you. I'm going to sit down because the table is lower than I expected it to be. So, so my name is Barry O'Sullivan. I'm a professor of AI at UCC, and there's a European Association for AI, of which I'm the president. Yeah, good. So I'm told to lift up this. So I suppose we might ask, what is artificial intelligence? And lots of people have different answers to this question. I suppose in the 1950s, Alan Turing devised a test called a Turing test, which was a test to distinguish between things that demonstrated, at least gave the impression of being intelligent. And I suppose one of the things about AI is that even today, AI systems only give the impression of intelligence. They are not intelligent in any way. Most of them, all of them, have really no awareness at all of the world around them. It's a ruse, right? So, and I suppose one of the problems with the field is that the term artificial intelligence is a little bit misleading. I suppose what I tell people is one of the reasons I like artificial intelligence is that it's the opposite of the real enemy, which is real stupidity. I suppose just a question of history, AI has been around for a long time. This is a letter that was written to George Boole's wife, and after George Boole died, so George Boole was the father of symbolic logic. And it's a paragraph about George Boole and Charles Babbage, who invented, I suppose, really the computing as we know it, at least today. And in this letter, they talk about the fact that they were trying to develop the concept of a thinking machine. Now, this was written in obviously, this meeting occurred in the late 1850s. There was an unmentioned woman in the letter, such were the times, and that happened to be Ada Lovelace, who probably had a greater impact on the world than even Boole did. But that's the gender inequality in science is still a story that survives today. But I suppose when people talk about AI, if you picked up a textbook, you would see things like this. You would see machine learning. This is where computers try to generalize from data. You would see natural language processing, so machines that try to interpret natural language, maybe try to generate natural language. You've vision systems that try to see and interpret images in the way that you and I might interpret images. But ultimately, none of these systems really understand anything of the world. They're simply dumb computer algorithms, and this is coming from someone who makes his living from AI. I suppose historically, so in recent times, AI has caught on because in 1996, Garry Kasparov was beaten by the Deep Blue chess program. Garry Kasparov really believed that it actually was a group of grandmasters who happened to be in another room competing against him. Of course it wasn't. So Deep Blue won. I suppose Deep Blue, chess is a game that's about search. So you search for the best possibility and you present that. And so what's very important is the ability to search. In something like Texas Hold'em, it's a bit more subtle because in Texas Hold'em, this gambling game, you also have to be able to understand whether someone is trying to bluff you or fool you, and whether or when it's right for you to fool them. And in 2007, the AI community started working on this problem, but it wasn't until last year that Texas Hold'em fell to AI, that an AI system fell to AI. I suppose I just want to point out something that's never really highlighted when people talk about AI these days, and that is whether this is really the case that a machine has beaten a human being. The thing that's in your skull consumes about 7 watts of electricity. So if you sit down to read a book with 7 watts of electricity, you won't read very many pages. The librettist system required about $30 million worth of electricity for it to beat those 4 human beings. So it's not at all the same competition. You know, it's a competition between someone who has 4 watts in their brain and someone who has consumed as much power as 5,000 lifetimes where nothing else happens other than Texas Hold'em. These are not the same thing at all, right? So we need to, and again, you're hearing that from an AI person. So Jeopardy fell in 2011, which again was natural language processing, but it relied on search on the web, and so it gave this illusion of intelligence. 2016, we hear of AlphaGo fell to AI, and that was a particularly interesting case because, unlike chess, AlphaGo can't be searched; it's too large, and so we can never really know that the move that we're playing is a good move. And so this AI system was kind of interesting because it developed kind of an intuition for the game. I'm giving the computer more credit than it's due, but that's a way of at least explaining it. We've all heard of self-driving cars. Self-driving cars is, to some extent, a solved problem. There are cars that are autonomous. If a self-driving car today, if we had self-driving cars on our streets today, they would kill approximately 1 million people every year, which we think is a rather large number. Which it is, obviously, but all violence, all drugs, all war on the planet today kill about 1.6 million people. Still sounds like a very big number. So the self-driving car would kill, 2/3 of as many people as we kill with drugs, violence, and war. But we human beings, in our driven cars, we kill about 1.2 million people every year. So what's interesting is that we kill almost as many people as there are killed in all violence, all war, blah, blah, blah. We kill slightly more than the self-driving car, but if you ask the average person on the street, do they want to have self-driving cars driving on the Champs-Élysées, people say no, right? So it's interesting that we hold AI systems to a different level of account than we do ourselves. And you could argue in some sense that driving a car is actually unethical given that there's such technology. But of course, we don't want to be the person killed by a self-driving car. There have been fantastic advances in AI. So AI system doesn't always have to be supervised. In fact, the best way of predicting poverty on the planet today is using unsupervised machine learning. What this means is information that is never touched by human beings. And basically, by correlating images of the world at night with images of the world by day, you can very, very accurately predict local poverty levels to an accuracy that has never previously been known to human beings. So there are some very, very good societal impacts that AI can have. I'm going to skip over these ones. I suppose a couple of things. Yeah, I'll skip over those ones. So if you're interested, just very quickly, there's a thing called a 100-year study in AI. And what this does is it looks at the state of AI and looks at 100 years from now. And it looks, I'm not going to go through all of these, but it looks like the big trends. So what are the trends technically in AI? What are the example areas that people are focused on? So for example, in the context of today, and the exhibition we're opening, in computer vision, which is one of the big trends, the example focus of vision is in scene interpretation and video captioning. What is happening in this image? And so for mass surveillance, for example, so for CCTV, you want to see, caption saying nothing really to see, nothing really to see, or here is someone who is planting a bomb or behaving suspiciously. That's what they're working on. And I suppose there are then domains of application and I suppose questions that people are asking. And these are important. So for example, cybersecurity and policing is a very, very big area for AI at the moment. Let me just focus on a couple of things just quickly because they'll come up. AI and bias. I often describe AI systems as bias in, bias out. And so why do I say that? Well, for example, if you type into Google, cute baby, and this was a very significant experiment I ran in my office. I typed cute baby into Google, and I get all of these very nice cute babies. And then I realized after a couple of seconds that they're all cute white babies. And of course, the algorithm has returned to me cute white babies because they know that it predicts that I'm a white person. It predicts what I would consider to be cute. It also considers where I'm going. Now, not all of them, obviously, but there are some, yeah. But it's not representative of the world, right? So this, I call this data bias, where the data set is biased because the number of people, so we'll talk about that later. Another form of bias is interaction bias. When we learn, if an AI system learns by interacting with other people. So Tay was a chatbot that learned by observing how people behave. So you can imagine if an AI system learned how to lead the world by learning from Donald Trump's Twitter account. It is biased, huh? So this is interaction bias, and how people, the conversations that people have on his Twitter feed are not good examples of how we converse in society. So this is other things like recommendation bias. So you consume things that are similar to things that you've enjoyed in the past. And so the world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller because you read the same books, you like hearing the same political opinions, all of these sorts of things. This creates a filter bubble effect, and this is a form of bias. There's a very difficult form of bias which is very difficult to get over, and that is that language is often gender biased. So for example, this was a paper that was published in Science, and it showed that gender biases were baked into language, that the co-occurrences of female phrases with leadership phrases and male phrases reinforced, I suppose, gender biases. And this is something that has evolved over thousands of years. And so if we train AI systems simply by allowing them to read our text and our literature, then they might not be as unbiased as we wish them to be. And so there's a huge problem when you're trying to train AI systems. What should you give them as their food? Because it isn't obvious how to overcome that. I'll skip over this one. This was a very famous. This is a point to say that just because something is an algorithm, you can't trust it, and I'll explain it later if anybody knows who these two people are. I'm going to finish in terms of, I suppose, the ethical challenges. So what are the big ethical challenges in AI? Unemployment is one. So as AI becomes so good that certain jobs are replaced, what do we do? So what do we do with those people whose jobs have been changed? If someone is made redundant as a consequence of an AI, should they be compensated in a way that's differently from somebody who is not? Should we introduce a universal basic income, for example? So should everybody be given the same amount of money to make their lives comfortable? And then anything addition is money that you work for and you earn, and you get it because you have different opportunities. But at least there's a basic level below which nobody falls. Who knows? So similarly, what happens with inequality? How do we share the inequality that's created by AI? So people who are, so for example, this is a very rough example, but for example, someone like Elon Musk, who has made an absolute fortune from AI, those innovations have cost something in other ways. And so what happens with that inequality? So as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, do we need to worry about that from a social policy point of view? Artificial stupidity is something that's really difficult to deal with. So what happens when AI systems get things wrong? So for example, I gave the example of a self-driving car. So what happens if we're the unfortunate person to get killed by a self-driving car? If a human being is killed by a self-driving car today, it makes international news. Yet in the same amount of time that person got killed, maybe thousands of others across the planet were killed by human driving cars, but we don't hear about them. Racism, so how do we deal with this? I suppose, how do we know that our technologies are being used correctly and properly? So they're kept out of evil hands. And I suppose, who really even decides whose hands are evil and whose are not? Right? So that's very difficult. You often hear about superintelligence, artificial general intelligence, and the singularity. So this is the point at which AI becomes indistinguishable from human beings in terms of ability. I personally don't believe in this at all. I think it's a useful thought experiment. It's a nice philosophical debate to have, but we are so far away from this that it's not a technical possibility in the foreseeable future. And I realize that I'm on the wrong side of this debate when compared with many other much brighter people, but I still believe I'm right. And I suppose the other thing is, as AIs become more intelligent in some sense, should they be given rights? And in fact, there is actually a community of people who worry about these things. I'm not sure whether the Furby ever came to France, but this little cute toy that basically sort of learned to interact with children. So the robot rights question is, at what point do we no longer have the right to turn Furby off? And, it's a question. It's a question. So I guess I could talk about more, but I'm just going to stop it there because I think we've got lots of things to say. Okay, so welcome to AI. Good. Great. So we have our fantastic panelists. And I suppose I come from a very different background to you, ladies. So I suppose, first of all, is what I've described recognizable to you as AI, or does AI mean something different or more general, or to you? So, what does AI mean to you? Is it different, or?
What we have, is this on? Is that what we see in the media, for the most part, the fear around what it is, what its current level is at, and what threat it poses. That it's so removed from the human body is a worry for me, because the longer I get to spend in my own body at this age, the more I become acclimatized, and you get used to your own machine. Maybe having a parallel to the human body suddenly in a robotic form throws a mirror back onto the human, and you start to wonder how you might be able to optimize yourself. So I suppose that's more my area.
If I can step in, so I have a project there called Towards New Amazon. I've been interested in AI since programming on a Sinclair Spectrum in BASIC, so that will tell you how old I am and how long I've been interested in AI.
Much younger than I am.
I guess what I was interested in, and I kind of realized recently that we had a huge cusp moment in 2014 when we had the two things happening of the GPUs getting, accessible fast GPUs coming into play, and also these giant data sets becoming available, and that cusp point where they both merge. And now we're on this crazy, turning point where I think people are quite innocent about the possibilities of change that are going to happen with those two things coming together. I'm interested in, now I know everyone talks about bias in data sets. It's kind of an obvious thing. It's a thing that will always be in the press, when, some of the AIs turn racist and stuff like that. But I've been interested in delving into it at quite, going into it in a further, deeper level. I've always kept my eye on the research coming out of Princeton and Stanford and Berkeley, just because I was actually quite interested in the graphical representation of computer vision. I loved how they made the decisions on how to figure out how to emulate what the eye could see. And interestingly, in computer vision, which, I have a project there in object recognition, and I always used to think that our eyes saw in HD, so similar to cameras. Obviously, it's a much more powerful lens than a camera and what it can do in terms of adjusting to exposures and stuff like that. But I always had thought that we just take in like a film feed. And I was very interested to find then that we actually don't. We take in like about 12, I think, low-res feeds into our eye, and then from that, like things like edges and differences and stuff like that, and from that we decide how to make up a picture. And it's really, really close to the research that's being done, which is fascinating. So I just love the idea that we're teaching the robots to see, and for the first time they are actually starting to see. I was reading a point about, one of the AI researchers was saying that there was a big jump in the amount of animals and just general creatures in the world, and they couldn't explain it for years. One into the millions. This kind of biological kind of, explosion. And what it was that eyes had come about, right? So I just think it's super interesting that now we have computers with eyes. So looking into that, I was out in, I thought more about data sets, and what are we teaching our eyes, what are we teaching our new robot children to see? And how are we deciding it? And by its nature, a naming convention, which through neural networks is kind of instrumental. It involves instrumentalization. It involves decisions that are kind of binary at the root of them, where you go, this is this isn't that, and percentages analysis of the chances of something being something or something being another. And to me, that just didn't sound very poetic, And I thought, where is the room for poetry in our data sets? Where is the room for a different way of collecting data? And the person who holds these data sets will be controlling the future. And the data sets are controlled very much by large corporations. So Google has a data set, Amazon has a data set, Facebook has a data set. The trials on AI were done on a data set called ImageNet. And when you look into ImageNet, it's done on WordNet, which is a Princeton-based semantic database for words. But when you look into that, there's inherent bias in these systems. They are, I would argue, capitalist patriarchal systems. And they, you know, even from the point of nobody bothered changing, taking things from old dictionaries and changing them around. So say gays are called shirt lifters in the Princeton WordNet. Women are called all kinds of stuff. And nobody has even been like bothered going in and changing this. And that's always been very surprising to me when you look up these data sets. So I was kind of interested in how could we, you know, what can we do to create our own data sets and how can we take control of this? My project in there kind of imagines a new type of computer vision with a decentralized, it's very much a proof of concept mock-up, but a decentralized database where other people can feed in and note these images. Because what's happening is that the images are being given out to people on Mechanical Turk. Every one of those data sets is created by Mechanical Turk. Do you all know about Mechanical Turk? It's an Amazon thing where basically people are given micro tasks that computers can't do yet, where they'll annotate and say, yes, this is a cat, yes, this is a dog. But these people are working a lot of times in poverty, in countries where they don't have, for example, gay marriage or equal rights or, you know, notions of equality that would approximate ours. They, you know, more fundamentally, they might not have an idea of what a beautiful left-wing politics could look like and the technology that would accompany it. So I would like to, you know, I'm a tech evangelist. I'm a tech evangelist for other ways of seeing that aren't at the service of profit. You know, I love technology. I love technology's possibilities. I love the possibility of AI and all it offers. But I'd love to have it not in control of in the control of the few. I'd like it, even when I go into the universities, and I've been in the Insight Centre, and things are fundamentally driven by, you know, companies coming in and asking them to do stuff, because that's the way the universities work these days. And I just hope we can open up space for other people to work with AI, create data sets, like big open source systems of data with different annotations. Anyway, that's a big long spiel, but there you go.
I very much kind of get what you're saying, Caroline, in the kind of whole idea of who owns data sets and the kind of problems that are going to, so basically whoever owns them owns the money. Yeah. That is pretty much where that's going. I suppose for me, I'm interested in the internet and the way AI controls the internet itself, and in the idea of the echo chamber and the fact that we are inherently making our world smaller using AI, the potential of AI to make our world bigger. It isn't going to happen. We're literally going to have an internet of me. So when you go on, you realize that everything you want at your fingertips is there, but it's just for you. So instead of this worldview, you've got only a view that is your opinions, your political beliefs. And I suppose that's where the potential of AI for damaging kind of political systems or perhaps worldviews or being able to see past your own sense of self in the world has actually become narrower and narrower with this technology. And also underpinning that is the people who are paying for that or paying advertisers to target you for all those things that you want on the internet. So there's a whole kind of capitalist kind of system that underpins AI, and it is very much capitalist driven, and we are feeding into that system. So I suppose I'm just aware of how do we teach ourselves to re-navigate that consciously, so we're not going in, buying into ourselves.
So my professional lifetime, I think AI has become, there have been two sort of lives. You're absolutely right. The current drive in AI is around GPUs, is around fast hardware. So computers that are very, very fast. Large amounts of data, because we photograph everything from our cat having a glass of water to telling people what we've just done 5 seconds ago. So the availability of data, the availability of compute, and the availability of I suppose memory in order to do all of this. But that isn't always what AI was about, and I think that's the revolution in AI that we see today. But 15, 20 years ago, AI was much more about understanding the mind. It was about understanding how we think, and it was about symbols and logic. And we have certainly lost a lot of, I suppose, in the AI world, as an AI person, I would see that data-driven AI as one small part. And I think the understanding of what it means to be intelligent and what we do as human beings when we think is something that we really need to get a handle on. And I suppose something you said about, about understanding sight. One thing that's very interesting in terms of biased sight data and knowledge is that we can often see something and we know it isn't true, but our brain tells us it's true. The classic example is an optical illusion. We can see that the line is long. It seems like it's longer than that one, but we measure it and we know that it is not true, right? But we still, that's because our brains have biases, right? So so I suppose we should, when we think of AI, I suppose I would encourage you not just to think about the data one, because all of the issues you raise are absolutely serious and are far more serious than what I'm going to say in a second. But there's also that other side, which is the understanding of what intelligence is all about. So I suppose as artists, and you've partly answer this question, but I suppose, in the context of all of that stuff, right, about AI and where it is and where it brings us, what's the role of art in sort of counterbalancing the AI story? So what is it that art can do to, I suppose, raise problems with AI in the context of society, or to sort of show a mirror back and show that AI is or isn't something? So. What do you think? Which one of you wants? Do you want to take that, or is it a silly question?
The first thing that springs to mind was a project that myself and Caroline worked on a couple of years ago when we were investigating emotional tracking software that purported to be, I think cynically, it was going to be used for marketing. So they would have a camera in a shop and you'd come in and it would get an idea of what your emotional state might be, whether you'd be happy or sad, and then could market to that.
Yeah.
And from an artistic point of view, I suppose we were trying to figure out how to stretch the limits of that software. And there was a New Zealand bank website that took you through a series of questions while the camera was on to bring about emotional responses. And we used this software as a launch, and again tried to see how we could stretch the working of it by introducing images of clouds and other things that weren't immediately recognizable as faces. So we asked the software to imagine where the faces were, to replicate the humans lying in fields looking up at the sky and stretching to say that's a dog or that's a cat.
Well, in fact, this is actually a serious field of study in AI now, this idea of, so machine learning people call these adversarial images. So imagine a self-driving car that looks out on the world and it sees speed limit signs. So the technical question is, well, how easy is it to fool the AI system into thinking that that's not a stop sign, but it's a right turn? And so what subtle changes would you need to make? And this is actually a serious field of study because we need to understand how robust our AI systems are, or whether they're susceptible to very tiny things that are silly. Like, for example, there's a hairdresser here in Paris who now who has created hairstyles to fool facial recognition systems. So and they're quite, they're incredible. They're fantastic hair. It's fantastic hairstyle as well as something else. Were you going to say something more? Do you want to say something more?
No, I was working with Alan Butler, who's one of the artists here, and our initial kind of foray into the world of AI, or thinking in regards to AI, we were going to build an AI artist, like a concept artist, from the ground up. It would be autonomous. We would send it to university. He would write books, everything. And when we started, we realized it would probably be white, male, French, and European. There was no question if we were to build it on the data sets that were there. So we came up with problems straight away, and then also we realized the technology was nowhere near ready to be able to send.
Yeah, I think it's hard. We were talking about this as well. It's really hard when you're at like point with AI, for example, it's just like, it's really hard as an artist to try and to work with it because you don't have interfaces you can access. So you just, like I was trying to work with TensorFlow and, you know,
Kappa
and YOLO, OpenCV and TensorFlow, you know what, and for, they become impossible without having, you know,
very
A
quickly.
PhD in computer
yeah,
science.
they do, and I think it will be. I've been out in the Insight Centre in DZU talking to them already, and it's been really interesting. I've just gone out there on my own, but I think it'd be kind of good for, you know, there's always programs where there's collaboration with
Artists and
well, no, but
programmers.
no, I think there's always programs in Ireland where there's collaborations with companies. And they're very organised and they're very embedded. But it's quite hard to step into an organisation, get into a university and start collaborating as an artist. It is, you know, you don't have the ease. You definitely don't have the ease.
Well, this has certainly changed a lot, not only in universities in Ireland, which has changed significantly, and I'm not a fan of it, by the way.
Yeah. Can I turn the question on you and ask you? So you're in UCC, you're a professor, you run the AI department. Would you be interested in working with artists?
Absolutely.
Would you see what they would add to
In fact,
the conversation?
In fact,
AI?
I'm trying to find funding at the moment to start an artist in residence program to do exactly that. So I suppose what I would like to see is what we do, you know, communicated and challenged in a way that people sort of that resonates with people, you know. And I can send a room to sleep, but you know, it takes an artist to sort of really, you know, throw the question out in a way that's challenging and people can really see through it, you know. And I think that's immensely valuable. I'm just conscious, does anybody want to ask a question or jump in? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm surprised that this discussion on artificial intelligence is amongst artificial intelligence people with no dialogue with the audience. I mean, that sounds very artificial to me.
Which is why we're bringing you in. Which is why we're...
It's your turn.
Yes.
I have a question. Starting from the very beginning, from what you say, artificial intelligence systems are not intelligent, and that before they give the impression they are
Illusion.
designed to give the impression that they are intelligent, but they are in fact stupid. But you can say exactly the same thing of a human being. You don't see any difference.
Well, there's one difference for
There
me.
is a difference.
The difference is that I think human beings at least can explain why they believe something. Lots of AI systems cannot generate an explanation of any kind. So they have no understanding for why it is. So for example, you mentioned TensorFlow and these, so like deep neural networks, these new techniques for doing image recognition and voice translation and natural language translation. They do the job, but we don't know what it is that they understand about the job, and they can't explain why it is that they did that. So I suppose that's why I would say, so for me the hallmark of intelligence is the ability to explain.
So the difference would be then that a human being can tell how it thinks.
Yes. Yes.
To think as a
Yeah.
AI system cannot.
Yeah, for me at least. That's so that a human being can, in some sense, replay why it thought in a particular way. The thinking might be flawed, but at least they can replay it.
Yes. So
What
what about love?
about love? Can I explain why I fell in love? Well, actually, it is funny because I have my Kindle in my pocket. Well, it's around here somewhere, down here. And on my Kindle, I'm actually reading a book about the mathematics of love. I think AI, look, what AI started out to be was, in the 1950s, was a summer project where, you know, a bunch of very, very smart people got into a room and said, well, we can build a computer that's going to automate intelligence. But of course, what they've discovered since then is that there were fundamental things that they just did not understand, not only about emotion, but also about perception and about intelligence and about what makes things difficult, you know, just to compute. So the field has kind of carried on in name, but there are fundamental deficiencies. And I suppose, as an AI researcher, I certainly wouldn't be arrogant enough to say that we can automate human thought. we don't even understand human thought. So
This is my particular interest in that as we're researching what is artificial intelligence, it really does put the spotlight on what is a human, what are these other areas. So we can, it's about an intellectual, it's a very small area of the human experience that we're hyper-focusing on. And the spotlight then for me turns into all these other areas that are being left out. But we haven't had a moment where we can really focus in on these elements. So it's that peripheral extracurricular area that I suppose is my particular interest.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, what is the difference between experts? They play with programs, but the outcome may be the same also. What is
Yeah, we had this conversation earlier, and we were saying if you had two pieces of art in the room and you walked in, and you didn't know if one was made by an AI and one was made by a human, and let's say they were both kind of driven either digital or technology-based kind of pieces of work, would you know which was made by the human? And there's already been tests done to show that you can't tell. But then it's up to the person. This is where we need to be pushing ourselves for more information and digging deeper around, not take things at face value. You need to go and read the intent. And to me, when you make it, to me, it's about the intent. I could put that on the table and say, that's art. That's my intent. And that's how I define. I make pieces of work and I go, that's not art, but that's art. So I have an intent to make it art.
On a side note on that, it's kind of a related side note, is the time we start believing that computers are human, when we get fooled, it's when they start to cheat. It's not when they perform well. It's when they actually try. When we catch them cheating, then we think they're human.
For me, the difference between them, and I'll come to you next, is I'm as far away from an artist as one can get. But I suppose as an AI researcher, what I try to do is abstract. I suppose the process of thinking or solving a problem to a point that it is general and in some sense describes the essence of that activity. So be it a learning task or be it a planning task, that I try to capture what it is the essence of that activity, which is not at all artistic, but I suppose it's like for me it's abstraction. I abstract.
This question of is the computer human, or comparison to it. When you see the way it's taken, I worked for IBM back in the 60s when computers occupied entire rooms, and now you have the capability, something in your hand, okay? And you go on the metro, 3/4 of the people there are mesmerized by their iPhone, okay? Couples, they're both on their iPhones and they don't talk to each other. It's changed the relationship. It's changed the human aspect of it. That's the important question. Comparing them, one has taken over. These goddamn things have taken over our lives.
But it's the human being that's using the technology. They could choose not to.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, but that's not the problem with the technology. That's actually the problem.
Or maybe it's actually part of your body now. That's another way to think about it. That's not a separate thing. That you are becoming cyborg with your phone. So.
Isaac Asimov, in the 60s, when he thought of humans and machines, he envisaged a day when he wasn't sure whether the machines would become more human or whether the human would become more machines, and whether there would come a point when we couldn't actually distinguish where one begun and where one ended. The famous Irish writer Flann O'Brien talks about this exchange of atoms between himself and his bicycle, because he sits in it all the time. And he wonders, he sort of ponders whether he is as much bicycle now as he is man, and is his bicycle as much a man as he used to be. I suppose the question for me is in this vein, and I think I spend a lot of time actually commenting publicly on the impact of technology on human beings. And for me, technology has had a massively dehumanizing effect.
Exactly.
So we are less empathetic, we engage less, we are present a lot less. And in fact, there are experiments now that look at the sense of space that children have. So for example, when I was a kid, if I saw a wall, I knew if I could run at it, I knew by running at it whether I could get up on it or not. There have been some experiments recently that show that children today, their ability to make that judgment has been affected. Now, I don't know the work very well, so I can't stand over it. But to me, it's plausible, right? And I think the way we interact, sort of, I was talking to our former babysitter recently, and we're just talking about, well, what's it like dating now for a 26-year-old woman, you know? And she told me that in the last 5 years, she has never met a guy in any other way than digitally, at least initially. So, which I found staggering. You know, maybe she's unusual, but I find technology massively dehumanizing, and I think we need to start thinking about its role in our lives, because these things have been designed to be massively sticky and to suck us in to these things. You know, unlike a book that has a natural endpoint. You know, the end of a chapter. You watch TV. There's a commercial break. There's a natural point at which you can get up and make a cup of tea, but not on social media, for example.
I think that you can make the point that with artificial intelligence, it will get even worse.
And I think unchecked, I think that's absolutely true. I think if we don't think about these things, I think that's absolutely true. I think the technology has the potential to be dystopian in that sense, so we have to be very, very careful. I would agree. Yeah, does it get to the bottom?
Yeah, I just wondered if taking on the jacking technology.
Do you want to answer that?
No, go ahead. You
Oh, I agree. I actually don't believe the technology is going to continue. One of the reasons continue in the same sort of trajectory as it currently is one of the reasons I don't believe in the singularity, for example. And I think for me what's happened societally is over the last 10 years, so the first iPhone came out in 2007, so it's a little more than a decade old, and it's completely transformed the world, right? I think we're at the point now where we realize that, and so we hear ourselves saying things like, well, you know, technology is dehumanizing, and I think that is creating a sense that we really need to take we need to take humanity back from technology, and I think that there is a significant movement against that. You know, you hear all the time about device-free days. There are device-free movements. There are technology-free movements, and I think we will find that over time, that sort of growth that we've seen so far, I think it will fall away, and I at least optimistically hope that people will find an appropriate place for technology in their lives. And I don't think that's going to be going.
But could I also just come back to like a point I raised earlier, was that like I think we've only seen technology at the service of capital, right? We haven't seen except for like
technology.
except for like, you know, if you're really embedded in tech and you.
Politics and Twitter.
No, but I'm just saying, if you, like I'm talking about technological systems, so you would only see, like, unless you're involved in, say, free software or something like that, and you can kind of see left-wing models of organisation of technology, right, in place and what they can do. But they're so battered back by capitalist systems and the dominance of the capitalist system of using technology. So I wouldn't rule, I believe that technology can be useful. I think we just haven't figured out how to use it equitably yet because it's so driven by profit. And it's soon, imagine, like, I just can't believe stuff like we have nanoparticles that can go around the body and like do crazy, you know, things of minute detail, and we're still driving around in cars like the Flintstones, you know? So there's some reason that these two technologies are like, one is frozen in time for it looks like 60 years, and the other is, you know, jetting forward. And the reason that the cars have stayed like that, and that is because of the oil industry. And basically there's just all these embedded capitalist agendas that are stopping technology going down a route that could be really great for society. I think that, like coming back to the universities, I think the universities are always super attached to the corporate agenda. It's just, they can't evade it. It's the model in society, so you can't really put the blame on them. It's all our faults. But imagine like if the universities came back to once, you know, looking at, you know, talking about how can we organize differently? How could we use technology, like in a system like, I think CyberSyn was in one of the kind of left-wing governments in South America. Someone dreamed in an alternative internet before it came in. And I know, just to, I wouldn't like rule technology out as a possible savior of society, you know?
No, absolutely. I think but I suppose I'm just saying that I agree with you, gentlemen. We need to find a place for it in a sense, you know. Lady over there. I guess just on the weapons, so you might have seen this week that the European Commission are pushing through some legislation to attempt to ban any use of public funds for the development of autonomous weapon systems. The overwhelming view within the academic research community is that AI should not be used for lethal autonomous weapon systems, and in fact, many thousands of AI researchers have signed declarations to that effect. I've been one of them. I think.
I'd just like to say something. Just about 2 weeks ago in Ireland, there was a bit of a controversy over when you go into Ireland, you have to, when you tender for government jobs, government contracts, and the government had tendered for somebody to build an AI that would scrape Facebook to track people who are on social welfare payments. So this was being developed by the Irish government. Has it been developed? It went to tender, hasn't been developed. But it's out there, it's already gone to tender, and this is what they're using. The government themselves, the Irish government, are using AI for already. So, and this is obviously ratified by law, or is it covered in? How does it work legally?
Yeah, which brings us on to, well, we haven't addressed your art question though.
Yeah.
Let's hold the surveillance question, which we'll follow up in a second, but come back to the art question. Does anyone want to talk about the importance of AI in art? Is that really
I think there's going to be more space made when the importance of lateral means of investigation are given more weight in light of the AI's restriction in that area. So, I mean, they say that the creative areas will be protected in terms of labour in the future, but it's yet to be seen.
Yeah, I think one critical thing at the interface of AI and art is understanding what is real and what is not. So that, you know, so I suppose we were just playing with the idea early before people came in of a Turing test for art. And so when would you know that you've built an AI artist? And so would a professional artist recognize the work of an AI artist? And I think the consensus amongst two of you was that the answer was no, which sort of discouraged me a little bit because I was hoping that there'd be a bit more fight in it. But but I think in some sense art is the ultimate test for AI, because I think if we can build something that creates the same emotion in us as real art does, then I think that's something special. That's far more than the Turing test. You know, if you can build something that writes poetry that really gets to you, or composes music that, you know, puts the hair on the backs of your head, on the back of your neck is standing now, that's something different. You know, I think, and I don't think we're anywhere close to that.
Well, that's all about the affective response, and that's where the machine actually stops. It can't handle affect. You know.
No.
So that's, you know, and I mean, like, a lot of people would say that they kind of, you know, that affect is old brain stuff. You see these transhumanists describing it in these kind of terms, and that it should be got rid of. You know, so I don't know if we could throw that question out to the floor. If people believe that we need to get rid of emotion, and where that would lead us to.
But you gave the example of Caspar.
Yeah.
So that just the opposite. He could not recognize the artificial intelligence. He thought it was human artist.
Well, I think he didn't accept the fact that AI was so good. You know, that he could be. He felt more comfortable being beaten by his colleagues than he did by.
Okay, but you have to have some kind of will to.
You know, it's not art, but it's creative. I think there are no AI systems that can produce good humor. You know, that can invent, that can make you laugh. You know, and I think that's interesting, right? So I think I look forward to the day. Well, I don't really look forward to the day, but you know, the day will be interesting when I sit in my office and an AI system generates a joke that I laugh at. I think that'll be an interesting day. You know, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. There was a sense of surveillance. I think you started raising this. So.
Yeah, just in regards to what you were saying about the kind of the law and the ethics around.
Oh yes.
Around the use of AI, and then the fact that the Irish government are now using it to scrape data off social media feeds for people who are on social welfare.
Yeah, so I suppose just on the legal issue there,
and the ethical issue.
And, well, yes, which are not the same,
Yeah.
right? Which are far from the same. So As Martin Luther King said, what Hitler did was entirely legal in his own country. It didn't make it right. So I suppose if we look at the legal and the ethical issues, so let's look at the legal issues around private data. So the General Data Protection Regulation is the thing that governs most of that, and there are exceptions.
And spying on your own citizens.
For national security, there are exceptions. There are no restrictions on the use of personal data. There are no restrictions on personal data from issues of national security. And so, so today, we effectively, there's nowhere in the world where there's a legal framework that prevents governments from spying on citizens if there is reasonable cause. And obviously, in the context of Edward Snowden and lots of other things, this is something we need to be very concerned about.
And yeah, it was just at the time when that came out, that article, it was only 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? Around then, and
right.
people were talking about, you know, using other words or language being kind of confused by the AI that was going to read it, and that people would start being investigated because he'd misinterpreted the meaning of the word that they'd said in their social media feed, and that this would spark off some strange kind of like almost witch hunt of people.
And I would just say that, just on a real nerd point, technically, they're infringing copyright by scraping you because it's not licensed beyond the internal framework of Facebook.
Yeah, this is true. Unfortunately, for national security purposes, there are exceptions to copyright law too, and there should not be. This did raise another issue about the use of technology in. We talk about the ethics. So, for example, there was a company I was doing some work with, and I stopped because it was clear that while the project that we're working on was not for a purpose, that the project that I was working on, I wasn't aware when I took on the project, and maybe I didn't think enough about it, but I discovered that the project was intended to be used in a setting that I was uncomfortable with, so I stopped. But it's very close to the topic of this event, which is surveillance. And so there are governments who invest huge sums of money in using AI technology to rate and to observe its citizens. So, for example, China is one of those countries. So in China, there is a social credit score, and that social credit score is a number that basically says sort of how good a person you are. And that affects all sorts of things. So I'd encourage you to read about it. But the amount of technology that you need in order to maintain that is quite significant. And the other thing that I encourage you to look at is companies from different countries look at what are the key technologies that they look at. And so there are countries where the tech industry is very, very involved in video analytics and video interpretation. And ultimately, the purpose for many of these applications is one that most of us would find uncomfortable. So it's surveillance applications, it's understanding. So what happens to the CCTV footage, for example? During the summer, I think it was, when the British royal wedding was on, is that right? It was a few months ago, right? Prince, whatever his name is. I can't remember. But you know who I'm talking about. There was a British royal wedding. And I think I watched the whole thing because I'm a romantic. But I think the thing that really excited me most about the royal wedding was the video captioning system that Sky News were using that you could observe, that you could use while the wedding was on. And so basically what it did was you could go onto the website, and as celebrities were captured on camera, there was a little box put around their face. They were identified, so this is Mickey Mouse, whoever it was. And you could click on Mickey Mouse, and you would get information about Mickey Mouse, all in real time. Now, of course, this is quite old technology. I remember visiting Google about 10 years ago when they were demonstrating real-time video captioning on YouTube, but for celebrities. So, for example, if you were prominently known, there was enough content, they could learn what you looked like. But the point is today, there was so much content about us on CCTV cameras, on social media, because we give it all away, that I wonder how long it's going. Like, one question I would love to ask these companies is, how long is it going to be before you and I can be automatically captioned? So the next time we go to a wedding, even though we're not celebrities, or at least maybe some of you are, that these systems will be able to recognize us. And I think that's something that we need to be concerned about.
The thing is, Wikipedia data set for that?
Huh?
Is it the Wikipedia data set?
It could,
for
could very well
celebrities?
be. Oh yeah, these are public data sets, right? But the fact that it could automatically, in real time, caption, you know, this person, like that's quite sophisticated, you know.
Basically, all these systems, artificial intelligence, they are code.
Yeah.
They are written by someone, so they are protected by copyright. So what is the proportion of individual copyright and companies like Google copyright in all these systems? And for the cars, for example, I was thinking, if there's an accident, there could be somebody who has programmed something wrongly or fine. What about this copyright responsibility?
I think the issue is more is the ownership of the data sets, number one, and then the neural networks. And because we don't, when we run, my understanding of it is you can write your code, but you're still reliant on, say, something like TensorFlow, which is a proprietary Google system, to do the analysis for you, to run the neural network for you. So they own the neural network, they own the data set, and you're just like kind of accessing it via an API and creating code. So you're not, the real value is absolutely held by them all the time, pretty much, right?
Yeah, that's right. So in fact, in a machine learning system is basically the one you're describing. The technique is written by somebody, so that's you know, so learn a neural network, for example, and you give it. So that is the program. You give it some data. What it produces is a program, and that program is owned by, in the way you just described. It's the person who pushed the button, not the person who wrote the original thing. And this raises all sorts of interesting things, right? So first of all, there's the liability issue. So if it's a self-driving car and it kills somebody, then who do you blame? But also there's the interesting question of intellectual property and the ownership of intellectual property. So I gave a talk recently to a bunch of lawyers, and this was an example I gave. And I said, well, when the AI system invents a way of solving that problem, that's a new thing. And so who owns it? So, you know, if there's a patent, who writes the patent? And they said, oh, well, the person who built the AI system. But I said, there is no such person. They said, oh, well, the person who pushed the button. I said, well, why? I said, you know, if I had a patent, my mother wouldn't own my patent. And, you know, the relationship between me and my mother is the same in some sense as it is between the neural network that's produced and the thing that created the neural network. And this seems to be a question that they don't have any answers for, which is kind of curious. So in the commission, so I spend a lot of time in Brussels talking to people about AI policy, which I find interesting, I must say. And one of the big discussions at the moment is around, I think, a piece of legislation called the Copyright Directive. And the people are really grappling with issues like this. So when is your data yours? When are the inferences that can be drawn from your data and the new knowledge that can be generated from your data, is that yours or is that somebody else's? And that question has not quite been resolved. And I think it's a really, really deep question.
I think we haven't realized as citizens that our data is worth something.
Yeah.
You know, that every time you post something on Facebook or whatever, that's all data.
Yeah.
And you do see people who are using it in a celebrity type way and kind of making money of it, but like the ordinary everyday person doesn't realize that they're actually generating all of that data out there.
But the culture around data ownership is very different around the world. So for example, in the US, your personal data isn't always yours. You can trade it for services. So if you use a free service, you often pay with your personal data. So the personal data becomes the property of the entity that gave you the service. That tends not to be the case in Europe. In Europe, your personal data is always yours. So even internationally, there isn't consensus on what these things should be. And again, coming back to the many ethical questions in AI, the question becomes, where does the consensus come from? You know, and I think that isn't clear. So, for example, lethal autonomous weapon systems, there is a consensus on the rules of war, you know, the Geneva Convention and everything, but it effectively requires that a human being is in authority. But in these sort of technologies, it isn't always obvious how that works.
And is ethics thought as part of business? You know, when you're dealing with AI, and is there is ethics taught as part of this?
There's a big sigh coming from our right
No.
side.
Well, I just think from looking at the data sets, right, where I have problems with, because obviously I explained to you earlier, when you get really deep into them, there's a lot of inherent bias because they're produced by people who may not have concepts around equality, let alone thinking of alternative models of organising politically. Sorry, just was.
Ethics.
Oh, ethics, yeah. When I spoke to the people practically about it, because I'm out in the Insight Centre, where they do amazing, really fascinating work, by the way, out in DCU, and but they explained to me that they just lift the data sets, and nobody actually does. All the scientists everywhere in, say, and the computer programmers, whether they're in like Stanford, Princeton, Berkeley, all doing the cutting edge work, they just haven't got the time to start thinking about making sure these data sets are really ethically sound, I think, right? Because even there was a new Stanford one that came out that's analysing stuff like actions between each other, and it was put forward as a new kind of ethical data set, and then I looked into it, and it was still being categorised by Mechanical Turk. So,
I think our computer scientists and mathematicians and engineers taught ethics. I think traditionally no is the answer. I think this is something recent. And so you'll find that the sort of field of AI ethics is now, I would say, less than 5 years old. So most of the people who are out there already did not receive any formal training in AI ethics. People are dealing every day in the fact that they know that they're dealing in ethical conundrums, and they have no formal training in ethics, even classical ethics. So, and in a sense, this is deeply unethical, because if you recognize the fact that you don't know how to deal with the ethical questions, then you should find somebody who does. Now, I think in Europe there are a number of initiatives. There's the AI for People initiative, which you can join and get involved in, which is all about developing an ethical code for AI. There are various groups who are trying to write down what the sort of charter of rights should be in the context of these technologies. But this is a very recent field. I think it's less than 5 years old.
And I'm just wondering, like stuff like, just the issue of just plain criticality as well. You know what I mean? To have somebody else come in and have a critique to various different ways of looking at things about the way you're doing stuff. Not just that, Sure. So like I know I'm not really up in it, but say the critical engineering movement and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And Teresa, you probably know some more about that, would you? Like just different, just a critical voice is coming in, and that's why I think artists. Coming into work and just introducing new ways of looking at things can help, But this doesn't. I don't mean this to sound as like an apology, but like what's happened in the last 10 years in AI has been an absolute revolution, and the field has not been equipped to catch it, right? And I think it realized a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, that it needed to. But and I would say that the field today is almost less about the technology and is more about the understanding the social impact, is understanding the psychological impact, is understanding the ethical impacts, so the legal impacts. So if you're not a technical person, then you probably have more to offer AI today as a field than the technical people do, because there are fundamental debates that need to be had around the impact on society, law, ethics, our own well-being, that as a computer scientist and mathematician, there's no reason. I recognize that they are issues, but there's no reason to think that I have the skills. In fact, I can tell you I do not have the skills to satisfactorily address these questions. Yeah. Could I just ask you another thing? I'm always banging on about data sets, but does it not seem strange when you're working on it that the only time you can access these kind of neural networks and data sets is through corporations, really? And why hasn't Europe got its own, if even working within the capitalist system, and they're all American corporations, even working within the capitalist system, why hasn't Europe got its own neural network and data set developed? Has it got it? You can maybe answer. Why hasn't Ireland got its own data set and neural network developed? That isn't relying on any of these systems.
So I don't use corporate data sets for all sorts of reasons in my own work. I'm heavily involved in the creation of what's called a European Open Science Cloud, which is a repository for open data sets where their origins are understood and people can come and see them and interrogate them. And in fact, one of the reasons I'm in Paris this week is that with INRIA and Thales here in France, we're beginning to develop an open platform for AI, so that all citizens can pull open data sets and understand the consequences and actually sort of do it for themselves.
It just seems like it's a problem of communication. If more people knew about this, maybe they'd feel they ought to become involved. From an ethical standpoint, personally, like it might be, well, maybe I can give time over to this. And I mean, the internet, the way we use it, it's an obvious platform
No, sure,
for gathering data to be used in a better
Absolutely.
way.
Absolutely. Any other question? Yeah, the lady here.
I think the most amazing experience I've had recently with a toddler was when he got a present. I bought him a present, brought it down, he sat and opened it, and then immediately went on YouTube to watch other kids opening presents of the exact same thing. And watch them play with it. That's all he...
It's very worrying. It's enormously
Yeah.
restrictive because thinking actually is a kinetic energy, and it encompasses the whole body. And by restricting your kind of engagement with a screen or some of this in a prone way with your body, we don't know how we're limiting ourselves.
Yeah, I'm going to be controversial, and I said there's been a lot of lazy parenting, I think, over the last 10 years, where it's very easy, and I'm accuse myself of laziness too, where it is very easy to give a device that really quietens a child down, and it's not good. You know, we should not be doing that. So I think we should very, very carefully think about when is the right time for kids to have, access to these devices for any amount of time. Current statistics in the UK are that excluding TV time, the total amount of screen time that a British 15-year-old is spending online is about 50 hours per week, right? When you think about how do you fit 50, that's more than a foot, if you're working 50 hours a week, you're working too hard, right? So, it's incredible. There's a question here, one question there, quick ones, and then we got to finish. Yeah.
Yes, you said about AI developed quite a lot last 10 years. During the 60s, there was a program called GPS. And aren't today's AI the same type? Of course, they had a lot more data, a lot more quicker, and can talk and listen and so on. But is there any difference between the 60s GPS and today's AI in that sense?
So it's fun to go on, one of the things that's fun to do on YouTube is to go back and look at the hype movies from the 50s and 60s about AI. And apart from the fact that the men are better dressed and they aren't in color, it's almost exactly the same story. There's a very famous one from MIT where the director of MIT at the time talks about the future of AI, how it's going to be solved. There's a machine translation guy who's talking about how they're decoding natural language from the Russians. Claude Shannon is demonstrating his checkers machine, and this is considered to be phenomenal. Ollie Selfridge is talking about the fact that he believes his daughter might, but probably won't marry a robot. And this is in the 60s, and I think there's a fantastic documentary I saw last week with Isaac Asimov, and it's almost exactly the same hype and story.
But that was creatively driven. I'm loving how these works of fiction have actually planted the seeds that we are following through.
Oh, well, Asimov was a serious thinker, but he did a famous documentary about the state of AI in the 70s. The only difference, I suppose the fundamental difference between what's happened is absolutely enormous amounts of data. Like what's happened in there's a statistic now that from IBM, in fact, that more data is created in the past 12 months, 18 months, that has been created in all of humanity before that. So data has changed. We have machines now that can do things that are just at the level that they can basically compute an AI concept that is equivalent to a human perception problem, so recognition and translation, these sorts of things. But beyond that, I'm going to go so far as to say nothing has changed. Yeah.
Just very quick off this,
Yeah. Well, millions of years of evolution have relied on our ability to learn how to use tools. Just because Steve Jobs decided that that our fingers are going to be used in particular ways didn't, and not let his own kids do it either. Last comment to this man here.
I think you indicated that the origins of artificial intelligence were optimistic.
Optimistic.
Things would happen, glorious future. And today, I can cite
Yes, indeed. And on that bombshell, I'd like to wish you all a very pleasant evening and thank our excellent panelists.